Before you load this video, you gotta first squeeze through a narrow passageway. This game might as well be called Shimmy of the Tomb Raider, because there's more loading zones than there are lines of well-written dialogue. Okay, you know what's up. Time for another one of my rare game reviews? Well, it's not really a review. It's more like a review. Really, I'm just gonna complain about the game for like 35 minutes. So I just finally got around to playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and man, let me tell ya, I wasn't planning on making a video about this game when I started playing. Sure, I recorded some video clips, maybe I would have thrown those clips into a future episode of Yeah, This Game Owns. But this game, in fact, did not own. This game was such a huge letdown, for me, personally. So I have to make a video complaining about it. Now this may surprise you, but I think the game was good. Just a huge letdown, especially when compared to the previous games. Like, this one is easily the worst of the 3 Tomb Raider reboots. But it really shouldn't be, because the game is not bad necessarily. I like the game, I do, but I also really don't like it. There are a lot of problems, which I'll get into later, but this game, it's like it metaphorically missed a ledge grab QuickTime event. This video isn't about, should you play this game? Yeah, you should. In fact, if you haven't played all 3 of these games in a row, you're not gonna understand anything I'm talking about. And I'm gonna be doing nothing but deep lore spoilers. So now is your last chance to turn back and enjoy the series. It's worth playing. You have no excuse not to play through these, and you can usually get all 3 for free pretty often. Even right now, at the time of writing, you can get Shadow of the Tomb Raider free from Amazon Prime. I already have it, of course, so sadly I can't gift my extra copy to someone since it uses linked accounts and not game codes. Unfortunately for you, the viewer of this video, I think this will no longer be available on Prime by the time this video actually gets uploaded to YouTube. Oh well, sorry, I guess you should subscribe because I made a post about it on my channel a couple weeks ago. So let me start this off by saying, I loved Rise of the Tomb Raider, the second game in the series. It was like a perfect self-contained story with tons of character development, and things actually happened in the game. It also tied all 3 games together. So when I began playing Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I was expecting the game to be better than the last one. And as I'm playing, I kept waiting for that to happen, thinking, surely there's gonna be like a big twist reveal or something that changes everything up, right? And then the game just suddenly ended. You would think I would like the story for Shadow since I liked the story for Rise, and both games kind of follow the same plot formula. You start off raiding a tomb in some country, something happens, and you do a sick chase sequence, and then you travel to the game's actual location where again something bad happens, causing you to have to survive in the wilderness for a little bit. And then you eventually reach some form of civilization where you do a few quests for the local people, which unlocks your path to a hidden village of people who have preserved their culture for hundreds of years, which also just so happens to be located like half a mile away from the previous known civilization. Anyway, then you do quests for those guys and find the magical plot device item which allows you to enter the endgame sequence and beat the bad guys who have been chasing you the entire game. Like, the 2 stories might as well be identical, except I felt like the story in Shadow was super weak and predictable compared to the story in Rise. The story in Shadow felt rushed in so many ways, which is very interesting because I felt like I played Rise for way longer than this game, but when I look at my playtime, both games took me 18 hours to complete. And you gotta also factor in the few hours I played in Rise doing some of the extra game modes like Croft Manor and Laura's Nightmare. Plus I did every challenge tomb in Rise that I came across, and the DLC quest. So the story in the second game is certainly far shorter, and even though I felt like I played it longer, I do think the story in Rise ended a little too quickly, but at least the story had mystery and some development and depth to the characters. Shadow just felt even shorter. But was it actually shorter? I went on YouTube and there's a channel, Gamer's Little Playground, who does a really good job pulling only the actual parts of the story out of these kinds of games. His video on Tomb Raider 2013 is 2 hours and 20 minutes. Rise of the Tomb Raider is 2 hours and 40 minutes, but to my surprise, the video on Shadow of the Tomb Raider is actually an entire hour longer at 3 hours and 40 minutes. So what happened with Shadow of the Tomb Raider? Why did it feel way shorter even though the story is technically maybe longer than the previous 2? Well, the big reason is that there's a ton of padding, even in the main story segments. But more importantly, the problem is the writing. Turns out, the main writer for the first 2 games was not part of the team on this game, and it really shows. Alternatively, maybe the writing was good on this game, and external factors led this game to be cut down or rushed. And let's be real, that's probably partially the problem. Square Enix at this time was notoriously always up their development studio's asses. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this game was intended to be a lot more fleshed out, but Square Enix had it cut down to reach a deadline. In the years leading up to Shadow of the Tomb Raider's release, Square Enix was hemorrhaging money, and allegedly, the game cost about $130 million to produce, which makes it one of the most expensive games ever. But no one wants to mention Square Enix's own in-house financial black hole for 10 whole years, Final Fantasy 15. There's a good video by Razorfist about Square Enix. He's got the numbers, go watch that. Anyway, I'm really glad both Crystal Dynamics and Eidos Montreal were sold to the group of people who actually run the world. Hopefully now those studios can unleash their artistic creativity. But I do also need to mention another factor with this game besides Square Enix, and that is Crystal Dynamics is known to be an extremely hard studio to work with. They also have done or said some extremely petty and questionable things about the previous developers of the original Tomb Raider games. And of course, these greater San Francisco area activists, developers, love to imply that old Lara was way unrealistic. So this is also one of the factors with this game, but Crystal Dynamics did not even fully develop Shadow of the Tomb Raider. They switched it over to Eidos halfway so they could work on that absolutely disgusting failure Marvel Avengers game, you know, the one that's now delisted from sale everywhere. I hope that Disney money was worth selling out your creative abilities. By the way, hey Eidos, how about a new Deus Ex game? Now hopefully Crystal Dynamics can also make some good games again. A lot of people don't even like these new Tomb Raider reboot games I'm talking about, but I think they did a pretty good job on them. Crystal Dynamics is also currently one of the 2 studios working on the new Perfect Dark reboot. That game looks like it's going to be pretty cool, though, of course, in typical Crystal Dynamics, or maybe just all modern, paid-by investment firm fashion, they want to shame women who look a certain way and call the original unrealistic. These companies, they hate perfect cuties. Anyway, Crystal Dynamics are also absolutely 100% working on a new Tomb Raider game, and rumor has it this one, titled The Tomb Raider, is going to be totally open world, probably live service, and you're going to have the bike from Tomb Raider Underworld, and it's probably not going to be great, folks, let's be real, but maybe it'll be good, I don't know. I never get excited for these new game releases. Like Stalker 2 is going to be shit, folks, everyone knows it, but maybe it'll be good, let's hope. I'll be pleasantly surprised, I don't know though. Anyway, now enough complaining about game development studios and publishers. Let me get back to complaining about Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Like I said in the beginning of this video, the game should have been called Shimmy of the Tomb Raider, because like every single area in the game that you enter, you gotta squeeze through a stupid wall gap. Some of these last for like 30 seconds, I'm serious. Sometimes there's 2 in a row and you usually gotta traverse them both ways half of the time. And listen, I get it. I understand why they're there and the purpose of load zones and asset streaming. There's wall shimmies in the other 2 games too, but this game, oh my god, I guess the consoles couldn't deal with the 60 gigabytes worth of Megascan's foliage assets being loaded, huh? I had a feeling something was up with this game in the very early levels when I'm escaping the tomb with the knife and killing Trinity guys. Randomly, a helicopter flies over, stops, and is like, "It's Croft, go get her." And this happens no matter what, even if you've been stealthing and didn't get noticed. So it's really just there as a combat tutorial, but it's totally forced. Like, it doesn't make any sense. And how about that vertical climb sequence thing? If you haven't played this, you're not gonna know what I'm talking about, but I felt like they really overused this sequence where Lara has to climb up through like a tight crack real quick, or she would run out of breath underwater or get crushed by a rock or something. And they use this kind of sequence at least 3 times in the main story, if I remember, probably more. And speaking of underwater, there's also a huge overuse of underwater areas in the whole game. So much so where they had to introduce the stupid mechanic of trapped air. In the previous games, when they wanted you to have like longer underwater segments, they just gave Lara a little device that let her breathe underwater. Then there's the challenge tombs. Okay, so I really liked the challenge tombs in Rise of the Tomb Raider. They were uncommon enough that I was always willing to do them when I found them, but in this game, they were everywhere, and I was doing them at first, and I definitely think the puzzles in this game were great. Like, some people think Shadow is the best of the reboots exclusively because it has good puzzles, though some of them, like the puzzle in the monastery, I just completely guessed on and got it right the first try. I don't know how, maybe I just know exactly how game developers think, so I can just look right through their puzzles. But let me tell you, one puzzle that was kind of annoying was the Temple of the Sun challenge tomb. It wasn't difficult, but when I got to the end to claim my reward, and I see that the perk I get is find more crafting resources, bro, come on. So after that point, I just gave up on challenge tombs, thinking that every single one is going to give a dumb perk like that. Plus, they were just too common. Like, every single area had an obvious challenge tomb. You didn't have to seek them out, they were just there with big yellow paint pointing to them. I did do a lot of the optional crypts though, since those I knew were short and they were not common at all. Unfortunately for crypts, usually the main reward there is like some gold and jade, which I didn't realize had no purpose till I pretty much beat the game. Eventually I did realize that you could sell it to the merchants, and once I did, I had basically unlimited money to buy nothing. Yeah, if I realized that sooner, I would have been able to buy way more upgrades throughout the game, but I figured I'd need the jade and gold to do like some dumbass crafting to make some outfit or something, but nah, they're just trade items. Crafting is so lame in this game too. Like, you can only craft clothing items, but you can only use those items with the default outfit. You can't even use them with just like the recolor, like the teal and brown outfit, which is the one I was using for the early parts of the game. And since I'm on the topic of outfits, almost all the outfits in the game look identical. There's only a few cool ones, but for a huge amount of time in the game, you're forced to wear specific outfits. Like, at least the blue tunic outfit is cute, and I was totally fine wearing that over the teal and brown, but you're straight locked out of even the default outfit for half the game, and that makes the crafted clothing items completely pointless. Certain NPCs will not even talk to you if you're not wearing the right outfit. Like, what is this, New Vegas? Why even have the outfit system at all if you're gonna be locked out of it for most of the game? Oh, and speaking of talking to NPCs, I gotta talk about mission givers and DLC in this game. I did a couple of the DLC missions, and I also completed some of the side quests in Paititi in the starting village, but they all felt kinda lame. I didn't mind the quest to get the coronation items for Etzli, and I especially liked the part where I had to search for Monko. I love Monko, and I love Pai. TT. Obasan Monko, Obasan Monko, Obasan Monko. I also did the dice finding quest, tedious, but whatever. I like the murder mystery quest because I didn't have to run around the map, it was all right there and self-contained, I just walked by and did it. But then I began a quest where the NPC was like, find me a bunch of murals and come back and tell me about it, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm not doing this shit anymore. While writing this, I looked up that quest to see what happens in the end, and you come back and the lady is like, her father took the kid and he had black in his eyes, so he's evil now. So you have to go stop the kid from being sacrificed. And when you come back and save her and you're like, you were gonna be sacrificed, she's just like, well, that's just how it is, why would you stop them? And then Lara is like, by the way, I killed your father. Yeah, the side quests are so dumb in this game. I did 5.5 of the 8 total side quests in this game. Yeah, 8 total side quests. Rise had 9, but somehow felt like there were a lot less. In Shadow, it seemed like every single NPC was a mission giver. I guess a lot of these are because of the DLC, and I only did a few of those though, so I guess it inflated the number of mission givers even more. Except for 2 side quests, the remainder all take place in Paititi. Whereas in Rise, the side quests are evenly spread between the 2 main areas, both of which are quite large, so you actually have to seek out the mission givers. Because the DLC quests in Shadow are given in the exact same way as normal side quests, once I decided not to do any more side quests, I also stopped doing DLC as a consequence, because I didn't know how to tell the mission givers apart. And these developers, they should know how to properly implement a DLC mission. The Baba Yaga DLC mission in Rise, which is the only in-game mission added via DLC in that game, was added in a perfect way. You just naturally walk into an area that has some bad guys, you take them out, and the game leads you to a little container with Nadia hiding inside, and that's how the questline starts. I just found her while playing the game like normal. That's how it should be done. I didn't even know it was DLC at first. Back to Shadow and DLC, the DLC completely negates the purpose of weapon upgrades, because the whole entire game, I'm absolutely going to use the way better DLC guns that you get by default, which are way better than the upgradable weapons. I guess that's probably true in all 3 games, but like, there's no way I'm not using the max damage suppressed shotgun. That thing is just too good. And speaking of weapon upgrades, in the main game, by the time you unlock the fear arrows, you get to use them in probably 1 or 2 total combat situations before the game is over. That isn't even a DLC thing. So just in general, the weapons are just whack with or without the DLC. And like, I can't imagine playing this game when it first comes out and it doesn't have all of its DLC yet. Like what, you want me to come back to the game every time they release a new DLC after I've already beaten it? Look, I like these kinds of games in the same way I like Professor Layton. I'm primarily playing these for the story, the environment, the characters, and the journey. This kind of game is only a few steps above what I would consider an interactive movie, which is fine, but when I beat Professor Layton, I'm not gonna go back through the game and try to find every single puzzle. Same with Tomb Raider. I didn't beat every challenge tomb and every DLC, and what's the point in going back and trying to do those? I mean, if you're really super into that aspect of the game, sure, and a lot of those challenge tombs were pretty fun, but I just don't see it being worth my time, especially when there's so many of them. In Rise, there weren't a lot, so they were special, but in Shadow, it's nothing but extra tombs. I suppose a lot of my disregard for bonus content comes probably from the fact that I'm a PC gamer, and I have like, what, 50 years of video game history across every single platform that's ever existed to choose from, whereas for a console gamer, this game is probably worth a lot more to them. Like, I think you can get a lot of playtime out of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and I bet for a console gamer who probably doesn't have a lot of games, this is certainly a game that would get you your money's worth. And it even has baked-in replayability. Why not play the game 3 more times to beat it with each built-in specific New Game Plus playstyle? Why not 100% it for the gamer score or trophies or whatever stupid numbers show up on your console gamer achievement profile? You probably don't have any other games to play anyway, especially if you're on a PlayStation 5. And this game, along with the other Tomb Raider reboots, also has a multiplayer mode. Now, I've never played it, but this one, I guess, is like co-op challenge tombs, so basically kind of like Portal 2 style puzzles where you gotta work together. It's probably fun, again, especially if you're a console gamer, although Tomb Raider 2013 had PvP multiplayer, which is a shame that this game doesn't have because one of the things I liked about this game was the combat, which felt pretty good, though the whole game did seem like it was built in a way where you could stealth through it, like you could tell where the arenas were before the battle started because of the bush and vine wall placements, not to mention the explodey barrels. The final boss in this game, though, was a lot better than the other two. It was pretty similar mechanically to the first game's boss, but now the guy can teleport and there's other dudes coming at you. And it was really pretty, so, you know, it was good. And one last good thing about Shadow of the Tomb Raider, as much as I absolutely hated the user interface for the skill perk selection, this game had the single most useful perk in any game ever. And that's the make it so I don't have to do a press E QuickTime event every single time Lara grabs a ledge with one hand perk. I don't know what it's actually called, but you better believe that was the first perk I unlocked. More games need this kind of thing. Like, take Fallout, for example. After I've done the lockpicking or hacking minigame once, I don't ever want to do it again. Ever. I know how to do it. I know I can always do it. Don't waste my time. If I have the skill level, just unlock the door! Okay, so enough technical and gameplay complaints. Now for the real meat of this video. The main thing that made me disappointed in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Everything else is excusable, but the story, I would say the story wasn't bad, but everything about the story was bad. So yeah, the story was bad. Let me tell you, when the game's credits are pretty much just as long as the entire ending sequence of the game, you know something's up. So I'm gonna go on multiple tangents for this part of the video because I gotta dump all my deep Tomb Raider reboot lore I discovered while making sure I wasn't crazy when making this video. So let me do a quick recap of every single important thing that happens in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. The game starts off. Lara is in Cozumel, Mexico, raiding a tomb with Jonah. They find a riddle, then the tomb blows up. Later that night, they go have dinner where Lara follows a guy, Dr. Dominguez, around and learns that he is actually the leader of Trinity.
Dominguez is not just the leader of the cell, I think he's the leader of Trinity.
Through one line of dialogue, somehow. And then you go sneak into his local dig site, which leads Lara to Mayan ruins that has a sick knife, aka the Key of Shakshel. But uh-oh, Trinity is coming, so Lara takes the knife, which somehow magically sets off the Mayan apocalypse that is supposed to consist of a tsunami, a storm, an earthquake, and a volcano. While escaping, Lara gets held up by Trinity guys and Dr. Domingo, who takes your cool knife, and then they are just gone just as the big tsunami comes. So then, using the clues you found in the first tomb, Lara and Jonah head to Peru in search of the hidden city of Paititi, which contains the next thing Trinity is after, the silver box of Eshel. While you're flying there, the apocalyptic storm occurs, which causes your plane to crash. You have to survive for a little bit, but then you find Jonah and make your way to a modern local village, where you then raid another tomb, and inside that one, you learn how to find the hidden city, which just so happens to be through another path in the same building the tomb was in. Once Lara gets through that path, path, she encounters Etzli and his mom, Unuratu, who is the queen of the hidden city of Paititi, and you team up to stop Trinity, who also just so happens to run Paititi. So you go and raid a really gross tomb to find a little snake thing, but on your way out, Etzli gets captured. So you tell his mom, and it turns out the snake thing is a key to open a door in the same place they're holding Etzli. So together you fight your way in there and free Etzli. But now, Unuratu gets captured. Oh no! But you go and continue on your path, raiding the tomb that was behind the door you opened, and that next tomb is filled with a bunch of these scary guys called the Yashil. And once you fight your way through them, you get to the place that the silver box was kept, only to find it's missing. But there's an inscription there, in stone, of a heron and an eclipse. Then you go and free Unuratu, who tells you that the heron represents the last emperor. So off to raid his tomb with Unuratu, who immediately gets killed once you find a clue left by a guy 400 years ago. Great, cool. Now you leave Paititi with Jonah in order to find the box. But uh-oh, on your way, Trinity attacks you, and you have a big battle sequence in an oil refinery. After that, Lara realizes the box is at a monastery, so you go there and actually find the silver box. But uh-oh, Trinity and Dr. Dominguez is there, and they take the box. So you head back to Paititi and start the endgame sequence, which is pretty much just raiding a tomb, but now the Yashil are on your side, fighting the Trinity guys and helicopters that are flying all around you and shooting at you. Eventually you get to Dominguez, who now has god powers and can telehop, but you beat him in a fight. And finally, Laura comes to terms with her parents' deaths and symbolically sacrifices herself, or her newfound god powers, which she stole from Dominguez, to save the world and stop the eclipse. You know, the eclipse that was never mentioned in the actual game lore, only through dialogue after the fact. That's the whole game. There was never an earthquake or volcano, by the way. Now, to make sure I wasn't crazy, I also wrote down the entire story of Rise of the Tomb Raider in the same simplified fashion, while still covering all of the core important story details, which I will not be reading, but when I compared the two, the synopsis of Rise is almost double the length. Why? Because of story and character development. Rise of the Tomb Raider is a game entirely revolving around different characters, and it's extremely dialogue heavy with lots of direct and implied lore. It's a nice self-contained 3-act movie, well written and well put together. Whereas in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, the entire game is just directly showing the player a thing that happens for some reason, so then go do other thing. Like, why does the apocalypse happen because Lara took the knife? It wasn't even that well hidden. What if some random dude just went in there? Like, I know I would have taken that thing if I found it. It's sick. The only character development in the whole game is Lara at the very end, when she's willing to sacrifice herself to save her friends and she finally accepts her parents' death. But the first Tomb Raider reboot had a lot more character growth for Lara. At the beginning of that game, she's like super unsure about herself. She's getting absolutely destroyed in the wilderness. She's like crying and getting messed up after killing a guy in totally justified self-defense. But then she dehumanizes herself and faces the bloodshed, and she becomes a cold, emotionless killing machine till the end of Shadow, I guess. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was advertised to be Lara's #defining moment, when she became the Tomb Raider. Yeah, she's certainly raided a lot of tombs in that game, and I guess getting over your childhood loss and putting away your dad's work to find your own path is good, but Trinity isn't putting that work away, but I'll get to them in a moment. No other character in Shadow grows or changes at all. Maybe Etzli, I guess. He goes from just random kid you interact with a few times to now the king, but that transition happens immediately and then the game ends. Unuratu's character development is that she dies. Dr. Dominguez doesn't change at all. I mean, he's not even really a villain. In every situation, he's pretty reasonable to Lara. Though misguided, his entire character's goal is to protect Paititi, and the way he thinks he can do that is through the help of Trinity to remake the world, which is Trinity's goal, I guess? But even as he's dying, that's all he cares about. Not totally sure, like, why Trinity is led by this guy, but what about the other Trinity villain? Commander Rourke. He's actually a cool villain. He's a hardened ex-Special Forces guy built up throughout the whole game to be like the main bad guy. Also no character development, but he's always there, foiling your attempts at success. He's directly taunting you over the radio. He has extremely memorable lines such as, "This is Commander Rourke," but at the end of the game, he just dies in a cutscene, and unless you were really paying attention, you might not even notice it was him who died. It could have just been any random Trinity goon. They just deleted him right out of the story for no reason at all. You don't even get to battle him personally. He just gets killed by the Yashil. real. The whole game is like this. Everything just immediately happens and then it moves on. Like, a huge part of the game is dedicated to like irrelevant cutscenes that just don't build any character or make any real backstory. They're just like there for padding pretty much. The whole story is so contrived, especially when it comes to Trinity. Oh boy, okay, time to talk about Trinity. They absolutely ruined them in this game. So in the second game, they show Trinity to be an ancient shadow organization, allegedly around since the flood of Noah. They have agents everywhere and their whole goal is to find supernatural artifacts so they can use them to remake the world in their own image, cleansing it of sin. Okay, cool, right? Even the core backstory for Trinity and Shadow is sort of reasonable at first. In the 1600s, Trinity was looking for the box of E-shell, which was found with the help of Spanish missionaries, but only the Spanish guys made it out of the tomb alive with the box, and they realized Trinity was bad for some reason. So they hid the box and left an elaborate trail of clues. Trinity then sent another expedition to Paititi after the first disappeared, and then they took over Paititi as the Cult of Kukulkan, while also keeping Paititi hidden from the outside world and preserving their culture. Now in the modern era, Dr. Dominguez is born in Paititi, and from a young age, he's really into the Cult of Kukulkan. And I guess the former leader of Trinity, an Italian cardinal, adopted him and raised him to be his successor. Sure, fine, whatever. I can believe that. Dominguez studied to be an archaeologist, and it also just so happens that he was friends with Laura's dad, and he probably had him killed because Laura's dad was gonna lead the outside world to discover Paititi, maybe? Hey, remember Paititi is like half a mile away from that other village from earlier in the game? No one's flown a helicopter or a plane over that place? No Saddaloon photos? Listen, I get it. In the Tomb Raider world, planes and aerial vehicles, they just can't fly over certain places. Fine. But it doesn't really make any sense that Dominguez would be the main core leader of Trinity, but Trinity is also ran by a high council, so maybe they do most of the actual work managing the worldwide shadow organization, all while Dominguez LARPs and does human sacrifices in Paititi. By the way, why would Trinity be cool with letting this culture continue existing? I thought their whole thing was cleansing the world of sin, but they kept the human sacrifices going for another 400 years. Yeah, the writing here is falling apart, just like any tomb that Lara Croft has ever set foot in. At the end of Shadow of the Tomb Raider, this massive ancient shadow government sect is just suddenly gone, I guess. There's some radio dialogue that says the entire High Council is in the final boss battle area, but they all die off screen, I guess? What about the rest of Trinity, huh? You know, like worldwide shadow organization? You'd think that they would have contingency, maybe? Well, if you're a complete nerd, you're probably thinking about the comic books. And if you're normal like me, you're thinking, huh, there's Tomb Raider comic books?
Yes.
And in the comic books, it's implied that between Rise of the Tomb Raider and Shadow of the Tomb Raider, Lara and Jonah systematically go and take out every single Trinity cell one by one till the only one that remains is the one encountered in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Amazing writing, guys. I gotta talk about the comic books for a bit, and I'm gonna prove that most of these absolutely nonsensical, might as well be fanfic comic books are in no way whatsoever part of the canon of the games, with the exception of the prequel comic, which gives implied backstory for Roth and Jonah and why Lara is so close to them. Now, I've never actually read any of these comic books. I'm just going off the synopsis on the Tomb Raider fandom wiki. So maybe there's something I'm missing. Why do the comics say Lara and maybe Jonah took out all the Trinity cells between the two games? Did they even play Rise before writing this? At the end of Rise of the Tomb Raider, there's a scene that takes place only 2 weeks after the Divine Source is destroyed, where Jonah is talking with Lara at Croft Manor in her dad's office, where Jonah remarks that Lara made the right choice by destroying the Source. You know, the thing that just happened 2 weeks ago. Then he says, "You've got a plane to catch." They both leave and the camera shows a map of Mexico with Cozumel circled, the starting location of Shadow of the Tomb Raider. So if you believe the comic books, like, you want to tell me that immediately after leaving Siberia, they both went around the world fighting Trinity for 2 weeks straight and didn't mention anything about that in their conversation they had before leaving to Mexico? Or maybe you want to imply that, well, actually, she just went to Mexico on an unrelated journey. After all, the comics actually say Lara spends months traveling, and she even fights Trinity in Antarctica. So, yeah, this is another case of bad writing. The only comics that are somewhat sort of reasonable sequel are the ones written by Rihanna Pratchett, who was the main writer of the first 2 games. Gee, who would have guessed the main writer actually can form a coherent narrative? The other comics are basically fanfic offshoots irrelevant to the story shown in the games, despite their inclusion of themes and characters. Like, are you really gonna try and tell me that after the first game, Jonah tried to commit Sudoku on himself, and that Sam is kidnapped by a completely separate group of Solari worshippers who were not from the island and brought Sam back to the island of Yamatai again? How is there an outside group of worshippers who worship a group that exists solely on a lost, unknown island? Like, these comics, they have to be a joke. There's no way. At least the Pratchett ones are a little less ridiculous. Like, in one of those, Alex, the hacker guy from the first game, appears to Laura as a ghost. He asks her to save his sister in Pripyat. Sure, fine. I guess I can believe that as maybe a little side story. Oh, and as a side note, I watched some video of some British trying to imply that Alex, who died an honorable death saving Lara, who was shown in the game to be crushing on Lara, was a portable document format file because in the game he playfully says a photo of a girl who he did not know was cute. Unreal. These British so-called men are hopeless. Anyway, the problem with these pre-Rise stories is also that in the very beginning of Rise of the Tomb Raider, a cutscene is shown where Lara is still talking about what happened in the first game, and even the media are running smear campaigns trying to discredit her. So really, Rise couldn't have possibly happened that long after Tomb Raider 2013, unless, of course, Lara just bottled up her feelings for years, and then suddenly, right as Rise starts, she's talking about it, and the media is attacking her. By the way, there's also a novel that takes place before the comics, but after the first game, which even completely contradicts the comics. The reality is, all these stupid literary side works are just a cash grab by Square Enix or whoever to LARP as if they have a coherent extended lore outside of the game, when in reality they are pointless and serve absolutely no benefit to the story, which is already pretty well told and implied in the games. Again, with the exception of the first comic, which is a prequel to the first game and explains how Roth pretty much raised Lara as a young girl, and how Jonah was a cook on Roth's ship, so that's probably why he's such good friends with her. And man, that brings me back to Shadow of the Tomb Raider. They really did my boy Jonah dirty in this one. They destroyed Jonah's character in Shadow. Not like he really had much of a character to begin with, but in Shadow, a lot of the dialogue with Jonah seems forced and weird. Definitely not the same character he was in the first 2 games. Except in certain scenes where his dialogue feels normal, it's a lot like his dialogue was written by 2 different development teams that didn't communicate. Really, Jonah just exists as a plot device and as the occasional voice of reason. They even had the gall to let the player know that he has not been piping Lara out this entire time. Which, when you take that prequel comic into account, it does kind of make sense, but still, the average player wouldn't know that. How are they gonna do that to Mans? Maybe they will not ruin Jonah in the upcoming Tomb Raider Netflix anime, which I'm gonna assume will be out by the time I finish editing this video. Maybe I'll watch it. Is it gonna be any good? Maybe? But it's Netflix, so probably not. They also did Unuratu's Super Dirty. For a studio that's obsessed with lay strong female characters, Unuratu was actually a queen. Not a lot of character to her, but at least she had some backstory shown in the game. But the Shadow Writers just decided to kill her because they probably wrote her into a corner where Lara couldn't do the end sequence unless she was the chosen one, not Unuratu. And the whole sequence and story around Unuratu's death is so stupid. Okay, so Unuratu gets captured, but you rescue her, right? Then Lara and Unuratu talk and realize the clue to find the box is in the tomb of the last emperor before the cult took over Paititi 400 years ago. They both get disguised, and Lara enters the tomb, finds the clue just by looking at it. She doesn't touch anything. She doesn't tell anyone anything over the radio. She just sees the clue. Then she hears Unuratu fighting. She's down there kicking ass, and Lara jumps down to join her, and suddenly Commander Rourke appears out of nowhere from the opposite side of the arena, one-shots Unuratu, and calls in on the radio that he has a lead on the box. How? How does he know what the clue is? And it's shown before Lara jumps down that Trinity had access to that tomb, like there was some guy up there with her and they never looked at that little cup before, and Rourke wouldn't have seen her look at it anyway. Like, how did he know the clue after Lara found it? This is probably the biggest issue in the whole ass story. It doesn't make any sense. Is Rourke a freaking genius? Like, and he just put everything together in his head when he saw Lara in the general vicinity of that tomb? So that leads into the next major problem. Lara leaves Paititi, gets attacked by Trinity, but then there's another earthquake foreshock, meaning The huge cataclysmic earthquake is about to happen sometime soon. Remember that apocalypse Laura set off consisted of a tsunami, which immediately happened, a big storm, which happened as they were flying to Peru, you know, like a day after the tsunami. Then throughout the game, there are earthquake foreshocks, but the big earthquake never comes. And the volcano never comes. Where were they? And then there's the whole eclipse death of the sun thing, which was just like randomly added into the mix in the first encounter with Dominguez. Did they seriously already forget about the volcano immediately after introducing it as a future event in the game? Now at the end of the monastery level, there's another foreshock, I guess, and that causes a mudslide, which you gotta escape from. But there's also fireballs and embers, and I just figured maybe the Trinity guys set the church on fire, or maybe the helicopters shooting flares, but maybe they originally intended that in this level, there was supposed to be the volcano erupting. Maybe a huge chunk of the game got cut before and after the monastery, and wouldn't it make sense for the big earthquake and volcano to happen before the eclipse? But no, the earthquake and volcano don't happen, and the eclipse happens before the big earthquake, and the game ends. What is going on with the writing in this game? How did they screw this up so bad? They had $130 million pumped into this game, and this is what they shat out? If I had $130 million of tax-free capital, I could start a game development studio that would certainly turn a profit. Easy, no problem. I already got dudes to hire lined up, and my games would at the very least have a coherent storyline. Feel free to email me if you're an eccentric billionaire who wants to invest in my future yet to be named game studio. Anyway, like I said earlier, it isn't like this game is functionally bad. The gameplay is pretty good. Yeah, the crafting is stupid and the story is super contrived, but the artists, especially the environment artists and level designers, did an amazing job, even if a lot of the assets were outsourced. I mean, come on. I wouldn't want to model all that foliage, and not even for $100 million worth of crypto wired directly into my neural interface, I wouldn't model that foliage. Ugh. I gotta end this here. I've already written over 7,000 words in my script, and I'm dreading having to edit this. Luckily, I can now permanently CC clean my brain of all this Tomb Raider lore and never think about it ever again. Or until they release another new game. Oh no. But hopefully you enjoyed hearing me complain about this game. Feel free to also complain about it in the comments below. And if you want to hear me complain about more stuff, slam that subscribe button and gently click on the up thumb button, because when I see number go up, it really motivates me to get mad about mundane things. But that's it. I'll be back next week with a brand new video.